Hey everybody, this is the 1 Hour Photo Podcast by Studio C41, and I'm Bill Manning. Today's episode is a very, very special interview, and I'm very excited to have this guest on the show. Um, we've heard some news that came recently, and I reached out to this photographer about some of the atrocities that are happening in the Xinjiang region, which is ultimately where the Uyghur people live. Recently, a photographer named Patrick Wack traveled to this region and photographed the Uyghur people and described this as an Orwellian dystopia. And a lot of people really, this has really been an atrocity that has been happening for decades. And these images that Patrick has captured are amazing. And so I just wanted to invite him onto the show to discuss about his photography and his experience traveling to it. So, Mr. Vok, how are you doing, sir?
Hi, nice to meet you. Thanks for having me.
Yes. You know, when I reached out, there was a lot of a lot was happening,
Yeah,
and we kind of took some time to kind of just let the, no pun intended, dust settle, and I wanted to have a conversation with you about this new photo book that you're going to be releasing, and learn a little bit about you, your photography, and what inspired you to create this book, and ultimately come to publishing it soon. So I'll let you have the floor. Tell me a little bit about yourself. How'd you get in photography?
well, that's a long story. Actually, I got into photography indirectly. I got into photography because my father was working in the photo industry. He was the general manager of a photo lab in Paris called Picto, which is a historical photo lab in Paris. He was not, I mean, he had nothing to do with photography originally, and then he came to this company, picked up photography, bought a Nikon, which is the Nikon that I picked up later. But so at home there was, there were photo books. We would go to a photo exhibition, so photography was kind of part of the part of home. So I mean, without knowing it, it was a little bit around me. I remember being very impressed by a James Nashtway exhibition that I saw in Paris when I was a teenager. So it was there, but I mean, I never pictured doing anything with it professionally. And yeah, and in my early 20s, I picked up this old Nikon F301, and then I started shooting with it. It was just a hobby.
Mm.
And then after I finished my studies, I was in Berlin. I was working for Ableton, um, a music software company, and then at some point they offered me like a steady job, and then I had to make a decision, and then I kind of saw like this, this horizon of working in the office in a company, and that kind of scared me. And I remember I had a friend who started working as a photographer in China, Eric Leleu, and yeah, I kind of saw it as this breaking point where I had to make a decision, and it was more like I was scared into getting into a normal life, and I saw this kind of open door, and I thought, well, maybe I should try it. I think I was 25 years old at the time, and then I turned down the job offer, and I said I'm going to China to be a photographer, and
Wow.
I thought I would stay there for a couple of years, and those 2 years turned into 5, 8, 10, and then in the end I stayed for 11 years. So originally, it's not like I felt photography was my, like, like I was this like this was my destiny or anything. It was just like I wanted to kind of keep this bohemian kind of traveling lifestyle, and then
Hmm.
passion grew with time, and then I stuck with it, and then I stuck with it until now.
Oh, that's fantastic. It's funny that you mentioned about photo books. I have several here around the house, and I think living in a world where everything is online, everything is digital, and we flip through Instagram constantly. But I constantly turn back to photo books because um, there's always something that history in general does not tell about photographers and some of the work, and that we may know this photographer, for a particular image, but there's just so many
Yeah,
more images that aren't normally told. And I find those images to be more telling and more inspirational because it's a body of work that leads up to what this photographer is. So I think that it's absolutely
yeah,
awesome that you had that around your household.
yeah. It's not like there was, so many of them at home. And if I think if my parents actually heard this, they would say like, "Oh, really?" Because I don't think they realized. I don't think I even realized. But images from this book actually were stuck into my mind, and they were part of this kind of yeah. There was a whole romance with it, and there were a few exhibitions that I saw as a teenager, and I still remember them up to this day. And it's only now, like 20, 30 years later, that I understand like the whole process behind it.
Very cool. Very cool. So, tell me about that experience as a photojournalist in another country like that, because, I would think that, from my perspective here, that we have a free press, and, I can imagine that things in China are kind of a little bit different as far as how photojournalism out there. Could you kind of give us a little bit of insight as far as how that is?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, for me, like those 11 years were a long process. I mean, the
Mm,
first thing is that I don't think of myself as a photojournalist.
mm,
I don't cover news. This is not something that I do. I mean, I might do like a few stories here and there for like press assignments that are related to news, but my documentary project are more like like going backstage of what's happening, or more like long term.
mm,
And actually, when I first got to China, I had no idea how to be a photographer. I was just a hobby photographer shooting with old Nikon reflex before this. I had no idea how difficult it is to actually be a professional photographer. So this is kind of something that I realized along the way. Even up to this day, I mean, I call myself a documentary photographer, but I also do commercial assignments. I also do editorial assignments. I think this is the reality of the industry for a lot of photographers
mm,
now. It's difficult to leave from press assignments. So a lot of us actually do a lot of different things. Like the borders have blurred between what you are as a photographer. You need to do a lot of different things. Um, I think in the first years, what I wanted to prove to myself was actually that I could live from photography. So I would do anything. Actually, I like the first gigs that I got in Shanghai were working as a nightlife photographer in like big Chinese clubs.
mm,
It was a great school to learn photography, to learn how to work with a flash, with a digital camera. But I was basically, I was really shy. I was getting drunk to be able to make those pictures. And that's basically the first gigs that I got,
mm,
and actually allowed me to, pay for a rent and not sleep on my friend's couch, which I did for like 9 months at the beginning.
mm,
Um, and then when I started doing like more editorial photography, press assignments, I was never really working for local Chinese media. I was always working for the foreign press, mostly Western press, American, British, French, German. So this kind of freedom of press was never, on me like it is on like local Chinese photographers working
mm,
for, Chinese media outlets. It's true that being in China, working as a foreign photojournalist, or it's more difficult because of course there's a lot of restrictions. You're being controlled, you're being checked, you don't have access to a lot of things. But this is really not like being a Chinese photographer. It's working for Chinese media where everything is controlled by the government. So yeah, as a foreign photographer, you're always a little bit, you're inside of it and outside of it at the same time.
oh, that's fascinating. Um, when you worked in documenting the Uyghur people, was this an outside assignment that just became a project, or was this something that you felt like that you needed to do and tell this story in the form of a documentary?
It was purely a self-funded personal project.
Mhm,
It's a lot of what I do is actually about this. I always have two or three long-term documentary projects of my own that I keep working on, that I finance with commercial assignments or with press assignments. This is really a balance that everyone needs to fine. I think for a lot of us, it might start with like a small assignment where you're being sent to do something for like 2 or 3 days, and you feel there's a lot more to do, and then you're gonna invest by yourself to actually do more. But this time it was really a personal project. I mean, I had been in China for 10 years at that point. It was 2016, and I was already thinking very hard of leaving China, and I wanted this project to be kind of my swan song about China, my last project. And
Mm.
a lot of what I was doing, and a lot of what you see about China, is always about this, the industrious eastern part of China on the coast, but that was the whole west of China, the far west of China, which is basically Xinjiang and Tibet. And I felt like I wanted to do a project there, and I wanted to do a project about a place in China that doesn't look like China.
Mm.
Something that, and I was also looking for a place that I could express myself personally, my own emotions, and a place that had some relevance with, geopolitics and everything that was happening. And at the time, Xi Jinping, they had started the Belt and Road Initiative, the new Silk Roads policy. So there was really a push to the west of China. So I always try and find something that has, in my opinion, some poetic potential, where I could see myself, expressing myself artistically, and something that has relevance in terms of what's happening in the world. And all of that was combined with Xinjiang, and that was the original intent. And because I kept on going, and because the region kept changing so much, the project evolved. And then I went, for another project later. But originally I just wanted to do, and also, I had long discussions with a good friend of mine, Dan Keen, who's was a creative writing teacher at NYU in Shanghai. And actually, in his class, where he was doing comparative literature, he was talking about this comparison between the American West and the Chinese West.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was really, really amazing, because I also have this kind of emotional connection with the American West, because I spent 2 years of my life in the US.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to see if I could find the American West in the west of China, meaning I wanted to see if I could, if like the conquest of the West, this American manifest destiny, of going to the West. Or it seemed like there was something similar happening in China, like this push to the West. And I wanted to see if I could compare this, 19th century American mythology with a 21st century Chinese mythology, to see if there was something to be compared, similar. Or so that was kind of the what was the driving force behind the project at the beginning.
Oh, fascinating. That's a very interesting concept. I've never really gave into any kind of consideration as far as um, the idea. I guess just for Americans, the idea of the West is kind of like its own. Um, it's just embedded in our history. We never really think about what is unique to the U.S. and history. It has very or no comparison to other parts of the country. So to hear you kind of make that comparison, or work to make that kind of comparison, is very fascinating.
I think it's something that you find. That's something that I talk in my preface in the book. And when you talk about the Russian conquest of Siberia, for example, it was actually quite similar to the American conquest of the West. It was basically those empires so vast that basically they have to conquer themselves, and in China it was also the same kind of psyche behind it. Is those huge empires were basically, there's always this idea of frontier, until where can we push it, what resources can we find, what new opportunities and horizons can we find for people. In the US it was very much like an individual enterprise, like pilgrims would come, like colonists.
Right.
But at the same time it was also state sponsored, because the American army was there and then was cleaning up the land from Native Americans, but
Right.
also they were offering land. They were saying, come here and then you will own this land. And like the form is always a little bit different, but
Sure.
you have similar things happening, in the Russia of the Romanovs, or like the like the like the Qing dynasty in China. This need to actually occupy the land demographically to be able to claim it as yours.
Let's
And
face it.
this is
Yeah.
something. And so there are similarities, and there's of course like lots of things that are not similar.
Sure.
But it was this idea of expansion that I was actually really interested in, because it brings, it's in the American psyche, the conquest of the West is, it brings hopes, to all those people who, had nothing in Europe, for example.
Right.
But it also brings despair to the natives, so I
Yes.
wanted to document both sides of it.
That's fascinating. That yeah, yeah. Wow. It's a lot more than I would have expected. We hear about, just with all the news that was discussed about it, a lot of people saying that this was an Orwellian dystopia, and that and I think that's just maybe the tip of the iceberg of the story that you're wanting to tell in this book. So it's very interesting to hear that just one side of this book from the media and the sources, when there's so much more that's to be told in this book.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that was the intent for the first project, and
Yeah.
then of course that changed a lot.
Mhm.
That's also why I went like a second time for a second project in 2019, because of course this kind of romantic idea of the conquest of the West. I mean, when I was in Xinjiang, then I basically realized that it was a police state, like so much heavy surveillance, like the so much economic segregation of the local minorities. you know, uh, you know, you don't feel so romantic about Xinjiang when you're there.
Right.
Those are all ideas that we have in concepts originally for like the project, and then you're on the ground, and then you see the reality of it. But then I would have never expected that they actually would start like mass incarceration and things like this. So when I in 2017, I had over 1 year, I had spent 2 months in the region. I had taken like 4 trips, and I felt like the Out West project was pretty much finished. And then 2018, I read the news about the camps, and I'm like, I'm fucking horrified.
Yeah.
And that's when I decide that I have to go back, and then that's when I go for the second project called The Night is Thick, to basically document the region at that point. And I think that's what Dust the book is. It's my realization. It's like the description of the evolution of the region in like those 3 or 4 years that radically changed and
Mhm.
really turned into an Orwellian dystopia. Before it was, of course, it was a police state. There was an oppression of minorities. There was economic segregation, but now it's just turned into something completely different. And that's why I had to go back and update the work.
Wow, that's just, I cannot believe it's such a change in perspective from the first half. So was the second half never intended that you were just, the first half of it was done, it was discussing about the expansion westward, and then you had this major shift in perception, and then you came back for the second part, and the night is thick.
I think in the first project,
Mhm.
it's not all romantic.
Yeah.
Of course, it's. I think it's pretty pictures, pretty landscape, but I always try to instill, uh, um, the grimness. Can you say that? The
Yeah.
grimness of the situation.
Right.
You can see Uyghur people working in the cotton fields. Of course, it's a obvious reference to Black American slavery and things like
Hmm.
this. You could feel the segregation.
Oh
You
wow.
can feel of course, there's images about the oil industry, and because a lot of about what's going on in Xinjiang is also about exploiting the resources.
Mhm.
And a lot of the portraits that I made were also, you can feel that the people are kind of lost in thought. They're kind of this in limbo. So even if, I always try to make, good looking images, there's way to see that something's a bit off, and that's was my point with the first project.
Mm.
But then, when the mass incarceration happens, you can't make this kind of images anymore. That's why I had to go back and try and look at the thing more straight in the eyes. So
Okay. No, that makes perfect sense. Wow. I'm just completely speechless. I don't even know what to say. I guess let's discuss some of the imagery that you were talking about, because some of the imagery that we have seen is very much similar to what you are describing. Um,
yeah,
I think there is one image is of a person standing in a doorway, and you have this beautiful maybe sunrise or sunset.
sunset.
The
Yeah,
Yeah, sunset that was kind of coming in, and it was beautiful. But with the story that's being told in that image, um, it's very um knowing the story, I don't know, it just there's a sense of unease, but it was still beautiful at the same time. And the way that you're describing the intent and the imagery that you had, I certainly felt it in that one image alone. So tell us a little bit about not only the intent about that unease, but tell me a little bit about the selection process and telling the story, because I cannot imagine the images that didn't necessarily make the cut that were very close to it, right? So there's certainly going to be images that we won't see. Tell me a little bit about that process and your intention in selecting those images.
yeah. There's a lot of images. I mean, there's a lot and a lot of images. So it was difficult to make the editing. Um, but I tried for the book. I tried to basically recreate that narrative. What I'm telling you is about the evolution in the region, and I wanted to try and find a way to not take the viewer by the hand, but try and hint at this kind of evolution through the region over those 4 years. So of course you have a break between the two projects.
Mm,
They look different because the first project is shot on medium format film, and the second project is shot digitally. Originally, we also thought. I mean, I was actually was a dilemma for me for a long time because I envisioned the second project as black and white.
mm,
So to make even more of a obvious break between those two periods, like the before and after, like the implementing of that mass incarceration policy. Um, yeah. So the whole editing about making the book was about basically trying to describe that evolution. You start the book and you see kind of a thriving. The book takes you at the beginning from the um, you know old town Kashgar and Khotan in the Taran Basin, which is the cradle of the Uyghur culture. And then when I went there in 2016, there was still like a thriving Uyghur cultural life and religious life, because Islam is so much part of Uyghur culture.
mm,
So mosques were filled, call to prayers, women were veiled,
mm.
bazaars were full of colors and full of people. Um, so you were in a different country. You were not in China.
Right.
You felt like you had, and this was exactly what I was looking for. I was, oh my God, you're in China, but you can't tell. Of course you can tell, but it feels like you're more like in Central Asia, almost like in Turkey.
Hmm.
Um, and slowly along the images, you understand that something's happening. It's like the color tones turn a bit more wintry, and then you don't see those old towns anymore. You don't see the mosques anymore,
Right.
and it turns a little bit grimmer and grimmer until there's this break, and then there's an amazing text by Drew C. Gladney, who's a professor of anthropology, and Brice Petrolletti, who's the former Le Monde correspondent in China, who basically introduced you to the genocide and like the new policy, and then basically you enter the second project, and the look of the images is different. The distance to the people is different because I get a lot closer to the people, and then you can tell that the landscape has changed because there's nothing, there's nothing Muslim or nothing remotely Middle Eastern anymore in the landscape. The women are not veiled anymore, and then you see those long lines of people, waiting to be checked to just go on with their lives, and they have to do this like 10 times per day. So you can tell that everything has radically changed. Yeah.
And it's I believe there's an image comparison that you've made where there was a mosque out at the first visit, and then the second visit is just an empty lot, essentially, that the mosque used to once stand there.
It's not the same mosque.
Yeah, and it's certainly uh it is I think the terminology is cultural genocide, and that there is this effort to turn these people more Chinese. Is that the correct assumption in that, or
yeah, exactly, to
yeah?
re-engineer the people into Chinese people. Yeah.
And that's very it is very sad to hear that. When you were visiting, were you escorted, or was there any kind of checks that were in place? How did your travel to that place, was that something you could freely travel to, or did that have to be approved by the Chinese government when traveling out there?
So Xinjiang is open. It's not like Tibet where you have to get like a special permit to go to
Mhm.
Tibet, and then when you go to Tibet, you have to be escorted now by like what they call guides, or basically going to be minders, and there's only like a few places where you can go. So the days where you could go on your own to Tibet just with a Chinese visa are over. Xinjiang is not like this. Xinjiang is open, supposed to be open. So for out west 2016 and 17, I felt that we were pretty much able to travel anywhere in Xinjiang. We never had any problems. I never felt like I was being followed. Some other photographers will say the contrary, that they felt it.
Mhm.
Maybe I was, but I can't be sure. For the second project in 2019, so in 2019 for the 90th take, I went twice for 2 weeks. So I spent 1 month in the region, and I would say for half or like 2/3 of those 2 trips, I was being followed like constantly. So
Wow.
I had basically people waiting for me in the lobby of the hotel, and there's only like very few hotels where foreigners can stay.
Mm.
But I mean, the guys were just waiting for me in the lobby and just following me everywhere. I even talked to them, even had, smokes with them, and then,
Mm.
I mean, not bad people. It was just their job, and they were like telling me, yeah, the local police chief, he's pretty nervous about you being here, and we
Mm.
have to follow you and stuff like this. So they were following me everywhere. And then you have like the regular police and military in the street that's checking you all the time, and every time you're raising your camera, they're asking you to check your images or delete some images. There was a place where the local police chief actually came, was really pissed off, and asked to check all of my images,
Wow.
and deleted the half of them, which was not a problem for me because I have 2 cards in my camera, and then I basically was only deleting the JPEGs and keeping the RAW files. But they were all very nervous, yeah, and checking everything, and then making sure of just what I was doing. And
Right.
that's why you can't talk to people. That's why you're not, you would put people in danger or like in a really bad situation. So yes, followed very much until I get back on the plane back to Shanghai or something like this.
Wow. Gosh.
But always nice, nice,
Sure. Yeah.
charming. So charm. I mean, really, nicer than French cops in the streets of Paris. Nothing aggressive or just following me. Sometimes
Mm.
especially when they're Uyghur people. It was a lot of the cops now in Xinjiang are Uyghur people.
Mm.
And they're not bad guys. They're just trying to have a stable job, and then of course it's a better job than working in the cotton fields or
Sure.
Of course, sometimes you fall on like some, pissed off, Chinese police officer who,
Mhm.
but most of the time the people are not, aggressive, or obviously because you're a foreign guy, and then that's also why you're kind of, protected, or,
That's a very interesting experience. Um, so you finished these two trips up, or sorry, multiple trips. These two parts of the project. When you came back, how when you're putting this book together, I guess the story that you're going to be telling with these images, were there any difficulties with saying, hey, the first set of images were on film, the look is now in a certain aesthetic going to be different in the second part of that book? Um, you mentioned that there were some difficulties. Were there any kind of, as you as the artist, um, any difficulties with the two mediums being different, or do you feel like that you're okay with one being on digital and one being on film?
I mean, yes and no, but in the
Mhm.
end, no, because I wanted to show that there was, a major break into like their history and then in the region. So I think um, this formal difference is actually serves the project and serves the narrative of showing that something radical has happened.
Mm.
That's why I even, at some point I wanted to make it black and white. When we're actually printing the book next week. So I'm flying to Istanbul next week, so I'm gonna.
Oh, wow.
But at some point, we're thinking of this second project, like make it on a different paper. In the end, it's going to be on the same paper, but we find some design ways to actually show that there is kind of a break. I think just by looking at the images themselves, you can tell. The look of the images is different. Within the book, like the layout of the two projects is different. So we had ways to make those two projects like formally dissonant so that you can tell the break. But before, like, yeah, I wanted to be even more radical, use black and white, use a different paper, use like some kind of a booklet inside the book for the second project to show that this was. So we basically thought about different ways to. So I mean, yeah, to clearly answer I think this difference was actually, it's actually good. It serves the narrative of the book.
Oh, that's awesome. So it was embraced that they are
Yeah,
different.
definitely,
So yeah,
definitely.
absolutely, very cool. So let's change up a little, some gears a little bit. So there has been some news that it came from a result of this book and your travels. Um, when this will landed on Kodak's page, um, can you kind of explain to me what happened as a result of these images were shared, and then a couple days later, Kodak had taken them down, and then there was some concern or outrage by the people in China that that this was not true, and that there was some form of outrage that came from this, and Kodak ended up issuing a statement saying that they are not a political organization, that they don't necessarily support the views that you have. Can you kind of explain to me what happened within that first? I believe it happened on a weekend, and then things kind of blew up on Monday, and then a couple, maybe a day later after that, it was on the New York Times. What exactly happened? Let's kind of separate some of the gossip and everything along those lines, and kind of have you tell your story. What happened?
So a guy from Kodak, social media manager of Kodak, actually saw my work because I was emailing a lot of people. I was posting, on social media about the book, and he saw my work and he liked it, and he wanted to support it. So I'm very grateful to him. And basically, he told me, I mean, yeah, the images are great, the book is great, we want to support it. Please send me some images and please write a text, and then we'll make a post on the Kodak Instagram. So this is what happened. I mean, they posted directly on the Kodak Instagram, and the text was mine. And I think in 24 hours, it got 50,000 likes. I got a lot of, there was a lot of supportive messages, overwhelming supportive messages. And then some people were, some trolls or whatever you want to call them, or people who disagree with my statement about Xinjiang, also commented. I got a lot of supportive messages and hateful messages. And but the guy from Kodak said, I love the work. This is not a problem. Yeah. And I think after 36 hours, the post was removed. And shortly after this, they posted this appalling, ridiculous statement. And then the backlash was 100 times bigger. Mm. So the funny thing is that, this is, I don't know who's in charge of communication. I know that decision basically came from upper management. The social media manager felt sorry about it. But they got scared. And, to be honest, I could have understood, some people said I was censored. This is not like they censored me, in the press or something. This was their feed. So they could have removed the posts, and then, but posting, that statement was completely ridiculous. That they couldn't see that this would put them even more in trouble. But first, actually, the Global Times picked that up. The Global Times is basically the English-speaking daily of the CCP, of the government, like ultra-nationalist newspaper. They talked about, my post and Kodak, and I think that's when the people at Kodak got scared. And and then it was picked up. Basically the Kodak story, not my work, but the Kodak story got picked up by New York Times newspaper, basically everywhere. And and that's basically when you got in touch. And then I was like, let's wait a little bit, because now this is right. This is a bit too much. I don't even know. I haven't changed my mind. What I thought about it 2 days after it happened is basically the same now. But for me and for the book, it's amazing publicity. Everybody told me, any kind of publicity is good publicity. So it's great, because this was unhoped for. I wished, I wished like the whole thing was more about my work and what's going on with the Uyghur people than about a stupid Instagram post. Yeah. But in the end, it's good publicity for the work and for, what's happening in Xinjiang. So that's good.
It's very interesting from my side of seeing this being taken down, and having heard the story of what is happening to the Uyghur people is something I've known about for a couple of years. It's only made it on small news outlets like or public broadcasting at PBS has had a spot on it. And so reading about this, I'm like, why are we not talking about this? Why is the world ignoring what is the atrocities that are happening to these people? And I think almost in a strange way that this was kind of like that catalyst that, that it is bringing awareness to what is happening over there. I think from a result from this happening, and I say kind of in a way, it is a blessing in a disguise that I think ultimately at the end of the day that the intention with your book was to get people to talk about it. I'm sure people are purchasing your book, and so they're learning about these things, but as well as the art that's behind it in these images.
I think you have to put this into context. It's a photo book. Nobody buys photo books anymore. Yeah. We were planning on a run of 1,000 copies. Mm-hmm. Now maybe we're going to do 1,200, 1,300. This is tiny. It's not like my book is going to inform the masses about the plight of the Uyghur people. No. I think that any kind of short article in the New York Times or Le Monde actually informs more than my book will. But so that's why I can't have the pretension of saying that, I'm going to change, what people think about what's going on there just with this photo book. Sure. And that's also why I'm grateful. That's also why I think that even though it's completely ridiculous that this whole story is just an stupid Instagram post, this brought a lot of attention. So that's good. Yeah. But
Absolutely.
yeah, the book, how many people are gonna buy the book? No one buys photo books anymore. I mean, the days where so many kids, I don't know, of my generation or things, they would they would learn about things in photo books or just by going to the city library, and this is over. Photo books is not. This is also one of the lessons, is that you have more power with Instagram than by doing any kind of book.
Sure. No, I understand. But I think also at the same time, there is power with books.
Yeah,
For organizations like the Chinese government, these books are dangerous. This book, I certainly am going to be purchasing. I'm going to pre-order if it's still available. But I think that there is something, for you, it may be a book, but I think for me, seeing history being made, I genuinely do believe that these images are impactful, and so I do hope that they live to tell in a story so much further than it being a book. To be honest with you,
thank
that's
you.
that's from my perspective on all that.
Cool.
So
I mean, it's true. I mean, I really
yeah,
wanted to make a book, and the reason for this is that my images
yeah,
until now have been published in the press. Quite a lot of articles in the international press have used my images.
hmm
They've been in some exhibitions, but this is all like very ephemeral. You
yeah,
know, of course, stuff that's on the internet is going to stay on the internet, so you can
sure,
still see those articles. But I wanted to have like a lasting document,
yeah,
and I think the book form is definitely something for this. Two great things. I mean, it's going to be a lasting document, and I'm able to tell the whole story that I want to tell with the book, with the images. Which is because when when you have stories published in the press, it's only a few images and it's
sure,
just scratching the surface. But the book is like, this is how I envisioned the story. This is my story. This is
yeah,
there's a strong design that comes with it, and like there's very important text with it. First, there's my text, but then there's also two academics, Rémi Castet, who's the French specialist about Xinjiang, the Uyghur, and Drew Gladney, who's the American specialist about Islam in China and minorities, and Boris Pedroletti, who's the correspondent for Le Monde in China for 15 years, and whose work is very, covered a lot of political issues in Tibet and Xinjiang. And those three people bring to the book. I think I wanted that book to be more than a catalog of images.
hmm
And a lot of the images, they don't, address, the atrocities directly, because you can't photograph the atrocities.
right,
But with the design, a strong concept by Joao Lino, who's a Brazilian designer. Super strong design, that drives the whole narrative. And those texts, then it becomes more, it tells much more, and it becomes like political as well.
yeah,
Much more than the images could be by themselves. So that's why the book form is still vital to photography.
fantastic. Well, Patrick, I think we are coming up on time, and I believe the book that you're making, Dust, is an amazing book. I think that it certainly is
Thank you.
going to make a very strong stance, and something that is going to be long lasting. I know it will be on my shelf along with many of the
Yeah.
other greats that are there that I have on my shelf: Richard Avedon, Annie Leibovitz, as well as Steve McCurry. And your book is going to be right up there with them. It's just absolutely amazing work that you have done.
Thank you so much.
Where can we purchase this book, or pre-order it? I know it's currently in pre-order right now, but where can we learn about more about this book?
So yeah, until the end of August, it can be pre-ordered from the website of my publisher. So it's the Édition André Frère. It's an small independent publisher in France, but that does a lot of great photo books. So until the end of August, you can pre-order it there. So don't pre-order it on Amazon. Please pre-order it directly from the publisher. And then the book will be released early October. It's going to be released internationally. So I think it's going to be available in in good bookstores, in lots of places around the world, hopefully. But yeah, from the publisher website, and then hopefully in your bookstore where you live.
Awesome. Well, we'll certainly drop a link here in the description of not only this podcast recording, but as well as YouTube. So we'll make sure that we have those links directly to the publisher for you, Pat.
Thank you.
Pat, where can we find you on social media? And if anybody's interested in seeing your work, where can we find it?
You can go on my website. It's patrickwack.com. So Patrick minus wack.com. And I think big part of the project is also on my Instagram. So it's Pat Wack, Patwack, along a lot of my other projects and ongoing projects in Bosnia and Herzegovina and on the Sea of Azov. Yeah.
Fantastic.
And then also, I'm sorry. And then I'm also the co-founder of Inland, which is a cooperative of 13 documentary photographers that we founded 2 years ago. So we work together. We founded this structure and we finance it. We have a great director called Ariane who works for us from Paris to promote our work. Find a way to finance it, to make it happen, publish, have exhibitions. So I'm really proud of this group of dedicated photographers, basically who focus on long-term projects. So you can find my work there with the amazing work of the other 12 photographers. So it's inlandstories.com.
Excellent. We'll be sure to put the link there as well as your social media for your Instagram. So, cool. Pat, thank you again so much for your time. Thank you again for telling your story. And I wish you the very best in your book. And as well as I wish the very best ultimately for the Uyghur people. I think that I hope that this story gets told even more about the atrocities that are happening to these people. And that I do hope that something positive will happen to these people and that their culture does not disappear.
It's up to us. I mean, we need to make a stance. There needs to be more sanctions, and I think the big check is going to be for the Olympics. The Winter Olympics in Beijing next year. Something needs to happen. Otherwise, it's going to start to look like the Berlin Olympics, in Germany in 1936. It's something that should not be accepted. That there's a genocide going in this country, and that it's accepted by the international community. This is not possible.
I completely agree. Patrick, thank you again.
Thank you so much.
And you are more than welcome to come back on the show. If you ever have a second edition of this book or anything along those lines, please let me know. You have an open invitation to this show.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. All right, guys. Well, that wraps it up for this episode. A very special thank you to Pat for joining us. You can certainly find all the links to Pat's work down in the description down below, especially the link if you are interested in purchasing this book. Until the next episode, shoot some film. Dang it.